Good morning, everyone. We will begin with a short meditation after chanting. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Topic is wisdom from Mahabharata. Most of you must have heard of this great classical work, Mahabharata. We have to remember at the very beginning, it is not a religious text, but at the same time, one of the most well-known religious texts in the world, Bhagavad Gita, is part of Mahabharata. As a classical work, it cannot be designated as a religious text. That's because Bhagavad Gita is only 700 verses and it is only a tiny fraction of Mahabharata, which has got more than 100,000 verses. It is well known as the biggest and the most extensive literary classic known to mankind. And its author is Vyasa. Now, what does Mahabharata teach? That's what we are going to discuss. It contains many dialogues, hundreds of dialogues, of which the most well-known dialogue is Bhagavad Gita itself. Then in the last session, a few weeks ago, I discussed the Yaksha Prasna, a dialogue between a celestial being disguised as a crane and a prince that we discussed in the last session. It's a dialogue from Mahabharata. So today we are going to discuss some other teachings, also from some other dialogues. These dialogues in Mahabharata are well known because they contain some of the most fundamental human values. In a way, it teaches us that it is possible to live a spiritual life by being a good human being. When you can live a balanced life, when you become balanced, sensible, wise, and with a sense of common sense, you can live a spiritual life. Surprisingly, some of these dialogues, like, for example, the dialogue between a blind king, Dhritarashtra, and a great wise man of those times, who was Dhritarashtra's uncle, Vidura. This dialogue doesn't have any reference to God or worship or any kind of religious rituals. But it tells you how to live a sensible, a meaningful life. And that way of living with a sense of balance, self-restraint, wisdom is interpreted as spirituality in these dialogues. So some of these values in fact most of these values, can be used even in our own times, in your office, in your workplace, when you are working in the field or in the factory, in the university. We can make use of some of these great values. Well, I shall give just one example, then I shall say a few more things before entering the topic. As a sample, one important verse, Sulabha Purusha Loke Sadatam Priyavadinaha Apriyasya cha Satyasya Vakta Sroda Sudurlabha. This is an important verse. It comes from Vidura. This sage Vidura, where Vidura was the uncle of Dhritarashtra, the blind old king. So Vidura was himself a very old man. And he was well known for his impartiality, for his balanced wisdom, for his humanistic values. So he was, well, you can say, suppose you can imagine a highly educated, a wise, an impartial, old village elder who comes to your home when you have a dispute with your wife or with, in your case, with the husband. Comes, no, you should live happily, you should have a sense of harmony. Or suppose there is your children are revolting against you. This old man may come there, tell the children, look here, you should respect your parents. That's a part of your tradition. And he will tell the parents, look here, new generation, they have their own challenges, their own ways which are different from your times. So you have to be accommodating. You have to accommodate these changes, which is a generational shift, as you may call it. So you have to accommodate this. So this old village wise man will tell the parents, you can't insist your children or grandchildren to live as you lived 50 years ago. You have to understand the changing paradigms. It is part of the game of life. And addressing the children or grandchildren, the village elder will tell you, look here, it's true that you are living in a different era, but your parents and grandparents, they have sacrificed a lot for you. When you were small, they looked after you, they sent you to school, and today you think you are 6 feet tall. But remember, you are standing on the shoulders of your parents, who are 5 feet. So you have only 1 feet tall. So you cannot disinherit what you got from your parents. You can imagine such an old village elder, but highly educated, a saintly person. That is roughly an approximation of the character of Vidura. And that particular section is known as Vidura Niti. It runs into 500 verses in the Mahabharata, which, as I mentioned, has more than 100,000 verses, which means several times as big as Homer's Iliad, Odyssey, and Virgil's Aeneid put together. That's the size of the book. So I mentioned this verse, for example, Sulabha Purusha Loke Sadatam Priyavadinaha Apriyasya cha Satyasya Vakta Srota Sudurlabha. A sample of a piece of wisdom from Mahabharata. You remember this and go to your office, you will be able to have very good relationship with your boss and also your colleagues. You keep this, write on a piece of paper, put in your pocket. If you are living your home, interacting with different members of the family, this will be helpful to you. If you are going to, let's say, a negotiation, for example, you are a businessman, you are an executive, you have to negotiate, you travel to Europe, you have to meet some customers, you have to strike a deal, then also you keep this paper in your pocket, it will be helpful to you. So I shall explain this. What it says is, now there are 3 things in the world. One is what is essentially useful and necessary for us. The second one, what is actually useful, but we don't like it. And then another thing, we may like it, but it is like toxic, like poison for us. See, for example, suppose you are a diabetic patient, and somebody who pretends to be your friend comes and tells you, well, you take these wonderful sweets. That person is, and you want to eat sweets, but unfortunately you know it is dangerous for you to eat sweets. But suppose somebody tells you, you should eat these sweets are wonderful things. That person certainly is not your friend. It is called priyam. Priyam means what you like, what you want to enjoy, but what is essentially not good for us. It is called priyam. It's an example. See, a lazy student, he wants to read comics. He doesn't want to read his textbook because it is a bit boring to read textbooks. So he wants to entertain himself watching TV. So suppose somebody tells him, you watch TV. He likes it. But then that will be the end of his education. So something that he likes but not good for him, it's called priyam. The second one is hitam. Hitam means something that is actually good for him overall. He may or may not like it, but he doesn't mind it, but it's good for him. The third thing is pathyam. Pathyam is well known in Ayurveda. Suppose an Ayurvedic physician finds out, the ancient Indian school of medicine, many of you know, suppose a physician, a doctor finds out that a certain kind of food is not good for you. It can aggravate some diseases, some problems in your stomach. So he may advise you don't eat that, but eat this. It's called pathyam. Something that you should give up and something that you should eat. So now, what Vidura tells you is, there are wonderful people, there may be any number of persons who will be happy to tell you what you want to hear, but will be bad for you. So there are many people who may tell you things that you want to hear. That may make you happy for some time. And they may be very happy to tell you what you want to hear, what you enjoy hearing. But at the same time, that may not be good for us. Sulabha purusha loke sadatam priyamadinaha. Those who speak things that you want to hear, but not good for you. There are any number of persons in this world. Then apriyasya satyasya vakta soda sudurlabha. But there are very few people in the world who will tell you what is essential for you, but you may not like. Say, for example, a diabetic patient, of course, I am not talking about modern days. We are very much aware of our health. We are very health conscious and we are very much aware of what is good for us, what is not good for us. This is an old axiom. So, let's say it's children, for example, who may have some health problems. They want to eat sweets all the time, chocolates. So, parents may tell you don't eat it. Children may not like it. So, there we are telling children what they need to hear, but what they are not very happy to hear. Don't eat chocolates. So, Vidura tells the old king, look here, king, and this, for a king, for an administrator, this is very, very essential to find out who is the person who advises them. I mean, who gives the right kind of advice, which will be useful for the administrator, for the king, and who is the person who is slightly mischievous, who want to deceive, who want to give wrong advice. So a king or an administrator should be very careful. So Vidura, maybe in modern times, this is applicable to everyone whether you are a businessman, you are an executive, whatever work you are doing, you should be able to know who is your real friend and who is a person who pretends to be your friend but not actually your friend. So Vidura tells this king. Now this is the sample of the dialogue. So you can imagine, ethics and morality undergo evolution. What was ethically, morally acceptable in the 5th century may not be acceptable to our times. What was stated in some book in the 7th century may be horrible for our times. So acceptability of certain views and values could change, but there are certain fundamental values that do not change, that remain eternal. That is the type of teachings that you find in the Mahabharata. So, in other words, how to live guided by pure common sense. And remember, it is not based on an idea of a God sitting somewhere ready to punish you or reward you. Not at all. It is just based on simple, everyday, common sense, wisdom and observations. Now, I would say a few things about this Vyasa, who is the author of Mahabharata. Vyasa is known as the greatest author of Vedantic Hindu tradition. The number of books, the amount of his literature that he wrote can fill one entire library. He is the editor of the Vedas. That's why he called Vyasa, means somebody who classifies, somebody who edits. Vyasa actually in Sanskrit means somebody who classifies, who edits, who goes through literature and then classifies them according to different topics. So in the Mahabharata you find these dialogues like Vidura Niti, it is the wisdom of Vidura, and Sanasujadiya, another sage, Sanat Kumara gives advices, Yakshaprasna and so on. And here at one point at the beginning of the text, Vyasa makes a proclamation which gives you an idea of the wisdom of Mahabharata. It is dharme cha arthe cha kame cha mokshe cha bharadashabha yat ihasti tat anyatra yat na ihasti na tat kujit or na kutrachit. These are two different versions called Patabheda in Sanskrit, two versions. What it means is, what you find here in this Mahabharata, you may find elsewhere. But what is not found in this text, you won't find anywhere else. Why did Vyasa make this observation about his own book? It is not self-congratulatory. What he says is, Mahabharata deals with 4 fundamental values that guide and direct human aspirations, human life. That is, a sense of ethics and morality, and a sense of something transcendental. And between these two, our everyday common life experiences. So remember, first, a sense of ethics and morality that should guide our everyday activities, our aspirations, our sense of purpose in life. So look at Artha and Kama. The second and third value, that is our natural human aspirations and the tools that we acquire to realize those aspirations. And then finally, a higher transcendental approach to life. So these are 4 values that are discussed in the Mahabharata. Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha in Sanskrit means a sense of ethics and morality, and then our natural human aspirations for success and prosperity, expectations and fulfilling our expectations and goals in life. And then when you reach one stage in your evolution, then you look beyond, well, I have enough money, wonderful job, a big home, everything that's needed. But what's the fundamental purpose of human life? Is there something higher, something that's not empirical, something that goes beyond the everyday experiences? Is there a higher meaning to life, a higher relevance? So, when you think of this, then you may take a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, the Buddha's teachings, the Bible, or perhaps you may listen to some higher music, or at least you may go to the library and read some writings of Emerson, Thoreau, or Whitman. So, this is when we look beyond the bank balance, the promotions, and the incentives that we normally experience in everyday life. Yeah, you can say there's a gateway to moksha or the liberation. So Vyasa says, all these values are discussed in this huge classical literary work, Mahabharata. More than 100,000 verses. Descriptions and explanations of hundreds of dynasties, dialogues, events and episodes, highly philosophical discussions, and so on. So it is so extensive. So Vyasa says, whatever you find in the Mahabharata, some of them you may find elsewhere. But what is not found here, you won't find anywhere else. So that is one important statement. Another sample I can tell you how important it is. Every literary classic needs a villain as much as a hero. If suppose you are buying a ticket and want to see a movie or a play where the good man always succeeds, whatever he wants he attains without any objection, it is so boring, you won't waste money to buy a ticket and watch such a movie where everything that a good man wants is immediately realized. No challenge, no competition, no drama, nothing. That is terribly boring. In a way, it is a metaphor for human life itself. You can imagine, suppose we are able to accomplish whatever we want without any challenge. Suppose you want to get a job, you have lost your job, you make a telephone call, immediately you get a job, and you start a new job. And then that job is very easy. Well, if everything is easy and everything is wonderful, everything is milk and honey, that life becomes a most unbearable, boring and meaningless life. Because you won't be looking for anything higher unless there are some challenges, some problems, some difficulties. There will be no progress in ethical, moral or spiritual life or even in intellectual life. So, in one context, the villain of Mahabharata, his name is Duryodhana. He is the wicked man who took away the land and property and home of all the good persons, especially the Pandavas. And he makes a very wonderful statement. You may be tempted to agree with him. Janami dharmam nachame pravritti, janami adharmam nachame nivritti. This man says, see, I know what is the right thing to do, but I cannot persuade myself to do that. And I know what is wrong. I can never desist from doing that. This man says. And imagine, Patanjali would have told him, there is a way out. Or because of your bad samskaras, so you have to do Kriya Yoga, Tapaswadhyaya, Isapanidhananani Kriya Yoga. You do something good, then slowly your mind will change. But there was no Patanjali at the time of Mahabharata because Vyasa lived long before Patanjali was born. So the villain of Mahabharata says, it's very interesting. And in a way, that is a predicament for most people. Janami dharmam nachame pravritti. I know what's the right thing to do. I know how to speak politely, how to act in a proper manner, how to live the life of a good person. I cannot do that. And I know that it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to tell lies, it's wrong to do wrong things. But I can't help doing that. Old age doesn't give you wisdom. Remember, Dhritarashtra, the old king in Vidura's dialogue, he was more than 100 years old. And this man had a brood of children, 101 children. And you had a big king, totally blind. He knew what he was doing was wrong, what his children and grandchildren were doing was wrong. But this man never had the courage to step out and say, you are damn wrong, you should not steal, you should not deprive other people of their homes and villages. He never has the ability to do that. That was true of his eldest son, Duryodhana. Duryodhana was the eldest son of Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra was a king, physically blind. He was also intellectually blind, spiritually blind, ethically blind. So he knew everything, but he never could make use of whatever he knew. That kind of knowledge is absolutely useless. So, and then this Duryodhana, the villain, gives a justification. Kenapi devena hridisthidena yatha niyuktosmi asmi tatha karomi. This is what he says. Look here, some divine spirit is residing in me. And that divine spirit is making me do certain things. So that's why, yatha niyuktosmi. As I am directed by this indwelling divine spirit within me, I am acting. I am not responsible. Many people, many criminals, many villains, many scourges of humanity have this excuse for doing the most vicious things. If you look at the history of different religious traditions, different nations, you can see they always find an excuse for doing the most terrible things. So this is I'm just giving a sample of the wisdom from Mahabharata. Now, why did I quote this? I tell you, we have to be very careful about people like Duryodhana. They will do the most vicious things, and then they will find an excuse or justification saying that, well, I felt like doing that. They will give justification. And that's why Vyasa says at the beginning of the whole text, Vyasa makes a statement. It's well known actually. Urdhabahur viramesha nahi kaschit srinodime dharma arthascha kamascha sadharma kim na sevyate. Vyasa says, I am lifting my hands and I am proclaiming to the whole world. I am making this proclamation to the whole world. Nobody is listening to me. I am repeating this proclamation again and again. That is dharmat arthascha kamascha. If you live according to certain ethical, moral, spiritual principles, you will be able to live a happy life in this world. Whatever may be your aspirations, whatever may be your goals in life, success, promotion, everything you get, for that you need not resort to unethical means. Even without deviating from the path of ethics and morality, you can always acquire and obtain the highest goals in life. Even in secular life, it is possible for a man to live a happy life without resorting to unethical or immoral means. That's what Vyasa says. You stick to this principle of dharma. What is dharma? Dharma, it has many interpretations. In fact, hundreds of books are written on this subject. Different religious traditions, Hinduism, not only Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and so on. Essentially, if you want to give a brief description or definition of dharma, it is very simple. And that definition comes from the Sanskrit root from which the word dharma originates. The root is dhr. That's meaning. What it means is something that supports, sustains, preserves, maintains, prevents from collapsing. There are certain ethical, moral, spiritual principles and values that preserve human life, that sustain happiness and intellectual, moral and physical health for everyone. When you stick to those principles, you will be happy, others will be happy. It is not impossible to follow these principles. Remember, these ethical values are not necessarily coming from religious texts, and that is a very unique aspect of Mahabharata. You'll be surprised. When Vyasa talks, Vidura talks, of course they talk about God, but they also talk about certain universal ethical values which are applicable for everyone in this world, even for atheists. I will tell you something interesting. If you read the Mahabharata, you find if a modern day atheists are intelligent enough, this Mahabharata provides a huge wealth for their arguments. Because Mahabharata tells you, surprisingly, it is possible to be spiritual without believing in God. How? Because dharma is a central moral ethical principle. What helps everyone, what sustains everyone, what never does any harm to anyone, what helps you to look upon the whole humanity, no, even the whole creation, going beyond humanity, as one spiritual family. That is dharma. Now, sometimes these teachings are not found in some religions. Some religions are extremely divisive. But Mahabharata is so harmonious, so harmonizing. So Mahabharata tells you this principle of dharma. If you follow, you need not quarrel with anyone. You can live a very happy life in this world, and you can enjoy happiness within, and you'll be able to give happiness to those whom you interact with. That Udhabahu Viranmesha. Now look here, I'm lifting my hands. Udhabahu means somebody who's standing there, making a big proclamation, raising both his hands. Viramesha. Nobody is listening to me. Vyasa laments, he laments actually. This lamentation is one of the most oft-quoted verse from this classical book of 100,000 verses. Something very interesting. The author begins his work. Oh, look here, what a pathetic condition. I am raising both my hands and making this proclamation to the world. Please follow the path of dharma. For enjoying this world, for living a happy life in this world, you don't have to deviate from the path of ethics and morality and dharma. Stick to the path of dharma, you get everything that you want. This is the uniqueness of Mahabharata. I would like to speak a few more things, especially focusing on one interesting dialogue which I referred to earlier, that is, it's called Vidura Niti. It runs into 5 chapters. It's found in the Udyoga Parva. So, just as you know, the Yaksha Prasna that we discussed in last session, it is from Vana Parva, this is from Udyoga Parva. So, one day, the old king Dhritarashtra was visited by his uncle and a great wise philosopher of those times. His name was Vidura. And this Vidura is the archetypal wise man, or one of the wise men of Mahabharata. And you can call it, maybe roughly you can say it contains maxims on right context. And again, some of the books which have become recently well known, Chanakya Niti, is actually based on this Vidura's dialogue. So he is recognized in the Mahabharata as a paragon of duty consciousness, very calm voice, impartial judgment, and steadfast dedication to dharma. Now, I can just quote some statements from his work. Very, very interesting. And remember, these values you can employ. You can write on a piece of paper, put in your pocket. When you are working in your office, when you are negotiating with your customers, part of a business negotiations, you can use this. For example, na aprapim abhivanchati, nashtam na ichchati, chochidum, apatsu chana mukhyanti, nara pandita uchyate. Who is a wise man? That's the definition. Pandita means a wise person. A person who won't strive for what is beyond his reach. A wise man will never start working for something which is obviously beyond his reach. Very often we come to misery because we don't realize that it is not within our reach. So, having no confidence is bad, but overconfidence also is sometimes dangerous. And then, suppose he strives for something he is not able to attain, a wise person will not grieve, he will not worry about it. And then, even see abarsu chana mukhyanti nara pandita uchyati. Suppose some difficulties, he had to confront some difficulties, he will not be deluded, he will not lose heart. And suppose he had worked for some time and he could not attain what he wanted to attain, then also he will not worry too much. In contrast to this, Vidura also tells you who is a foolish person. So, of course, before that, one more teaching about wisdom that I shall repeat. Who is a wise man? Again, Vidura tells, Kshipram vijanadi chiram srinoti vijnaya cha artham bhajadena kamad na asamprushto vipayunte pararthe tatprajnanam prathamam pandidasya. Who is a wise man? Who is a sensible person? He says, a wise person will listen very carefully what is hearing, and he will grasp quickly. Kshipram vijanati means he'll have this concentration, the focus of his mind. So he'll be able to understand clearly whatever he is listening to, quickly, without much effort. He will not speak too much unless he is asked to speak. But he is a good listener. Chiram srinoti means he listens for a long time. He is a great listener. Unless you are a great listener, you cannot be called a wise person. This is very important. Because the art of listening is more important than the art of speaking. And you cannot learn the art of speaking without first mastering the art of listening. That's why Vidura says, Kshipram vijanati. You understand quickly. How does he develop this faculty to quickly understand things? Because he has mastered the art of listening carefully and listening for a long time. He has mastered the art of listening. And then what happens? When he works, he doesn't allow his senses to dominate over him. He is able to dominate over his senses. He won't be tilted in one direction or other by his senses. He is working with his mind, with his ears, with his eyes, with his feet. When you walk, when you travel, when you discuss, when you attend a meeting, whatever you are doing, your senses are involved. But at the same time, your senses will not drag you wherever they go. You rather control your senses. Again, you are able to direct your senses with proper judgment. And then another important thing, na samprushto vyapayukte pararthe. One interesting thing. Unless he is asked question, he will not speak. You can just imagine. Suppose you start advising people without their request. Suppose they come and ask you, if you talk to them, they will listen. Suppose without being asked by somebody, if you start giving advices, you can imagine what a calamity. More to you than to them. Because it is so disastrous. If you want to humiliate and antagonize your best friends, is the best thing you can do, or the worst thing you can do, is to start giving unsolicited advices. Almost like a declaration of war. So the best way to antagonize people is to give and to distribute generously all sorts of unsolicited instructions and advices. This is very, very important. On the other hand, if somebody asks you, and if you give proper advice, that person will be your friend. You'll be doing a service to him. So that's why this Vidura says, Kshipram Vijanati. He quickly understands. Chiram Sunodi. He listens very patiently, very carefully. Vijnaya chartham bhajade nagama. You understand the meaning. He will not be guided or directed by his own desires. Nasamprushto vyapayukte means, without being asked or other unasked, he will not start giving advices to people. This is one important sign of a wise man. Now, who is this wise person again, going beyond the apparent meaning? A wise person is not necessarily the most intellectual person. It's a total misunderstanding. Some of the most learned intellectual persons were also some of the most foolish ones. You can imagine, there are any number of examples you can see. In fact, many geniuses, according to William James, there is a thin line of demarcation between a genius and a person who is suffering from insanity. So sometimes, if you push your intellect in one direction too much, without a sense of balance and judgment, you are risking, you may be heading towards insanity, or it may not be always a insanity in the pathological sense, some kind of mental imbalance. So, Vidura says, one should be a wise person. And wisdom doesn't necessarily come from book knowledge or intellectual attainments. It comes from the ability to analyze, understand and interpret life as a whole. And then you will understand giving advices, unless it is your responsibility, will be courting dangers. If it is your responsibility, you have to give advices. It's like being asked. But when it is not your responsibility, you should not go about teaching or instructing others. Very, very simple. You can apply this simple common sense in our everyday interactions with friends and colleagues and everywhere. How much people suffer from unsolicited conversations, maybe misguided conversations. So if we can regulate our conversations, our interactions with people with proper judgment, we should not be recluses, we should not become reticent, but we should always apply a sense of common sense wisdom in our interactions with others. Now another example, for example, the signs of a person who is not wise. And if you put it the other way, you can also get the definition of wisdom. See, amitram kurude mitram, mitram dveshti hinasticha, karmacha arabhade, dushtam tamahu mudha chetasam. who is the first rank holder in foolishness, in short. That's the definition here. What he will do, he has a good friend, a set of good friends. He will foolishly antagonize them. That's a sign of foolishness. And that's because he mistakes his friends to be his enemies. And when that happens, invariably, he will start mistaking his enemies as his friends. So we'll be leading ourselves to a pit. So amitram kurude mitram. Such a person regards his worst enemy as his best friend. Amitram means enemy, which is not a mitram. So amitram kurude mitram means he will foolishly regard or mistake his worst enemy, and he will mistake his worst enemy to be his best friend. And you know what happened? Mitram deshti hinastija. Simultaneously, he will antagonize his best friend. He will talk, act and behave towards his own best friend and well-wisher in a manner that he will lose his best friend. His best friend may become his worst enemy. Actually, this is an interesting thing. So, book knowledge or intellectual accomplishment, even if you want to go training in diplomacy or management training, executives undergo this kind of training, paying huge amount, how to talk properly to employees, how to talk nicely. Or if you master the book, the well-known book, Making Friends, and the well-known book, Public Speaking and Making Friends in Business, used to be a textbook in YMCAs for many years. Dale Carnegie's book. You mastered that book. Once it so happened to me. One academic was telling, if you read Dale Carnegie's Public Speaking and Making Friends in Business, you can live a successful life in this world. So he tells you that suppose you are going for a negotiation, for a deal, you find out what are the preferences of the other party. Suppose the other person is interested in soccer, you start a conversation on soccer. And if you can somehow guess who is his hero in soccer, you also pretend to be a great fan of that hero. But then I asked a counter question. Suppose the other person also has read Dale Carnegie. And if you are playing this trick, it will be a disaster. So, that kind of book knowledge or make-believe common sense doesn't really work in real life. That's an important thing to remember. You may undergo training, you may learn how to speak properly, politely, hi, how are you, everything is fine, wonderful. But then that person also is trained in the same style of conversation. So it doesn't make much of a difference. But Vidura's wisdom, his instruction, it actually refers to some common traits found in certain types of personalities, personal characteristics. That is, amitram kurude mitram. Without proper understanding, we may inadvertently, we may mistake a person who is not really our friend, we may mistake him to be a friend. That could lead us to a trap. So also, we may perhaps foolishly antagonize a person who may be our well-wisher, our friend, who may be caring for us. We may, by conversation, we may antagonize him. So, indirectly, Vidura is giving us a warning. Don't do that. So, by defining who is a foolish person, Vidura is also defining who is a wise person. The opposite is wise person. So, a person who doesn't antagonize his natural friend, who is wise enough not to fall in the trap of people who pretend to be his friend, that person is a wise man. So, you should not hate your friend, you should not hate your enemy, but you should be aware of his true nature. This is an important thing. You need not be antagonistic or hostile to your enemy, but you should be aware that he is kumitram. So he may not be your best friend. You should be aware of that possibility. So it's a piece of wisdom. Now, when you read this, you understand it is not just a piecemeal, make-believe, management gimmick. Vidura is referring to, he is actually pointing his finger to some of our natural characteristics, and when we become aware of this, perhaps we can step out of the path of danger. That's the purpose of Vidura. That's why Vidura is actually giving these advices. There's another one, that is a very simple thing. Anahuda pravishadi, aprusto bahubhashade, vishwasadi apramateshu, mudhacheda narathama. So the definition, mudhacheda means somebody whose mind is deluded, is foolish person. Narathama means he is the worst of foolish persons. And he will enter a place without invitation and without expectation. So we go to a place where you are not at all expected and not at all welcome. That also is one way of acting foolishly. And then you start talking about a subject. Here, the reference is not personal subject, on a particular subject. In a situation that where such a conversation or such a subject is totally unwarranted, totally irrelevant, you immediately start giving a long talk on a subject which is totally irrelevant or inauspicious in that particular context. This is also a characteristic of a person who is a bit foolish. And then Vishwasadi apramateshu. Again, trusting a person who is essentially untrustworthy. This is a very interesting thing. Sometimes people sometimes believe, you should trust everyone, you should look everyone up as embodiments of Brahman. Vedanta says that. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna himself insisted on this. When you look upon the whole humanity as an embodiment of Atman, when you look upon everyone as your friends and brothers and sisters, that's wonderful. But in actual life, and there is really no difference between the highest idealism and reality, if you know the true implication of these higher ideals. The highest ideal is there, but not every person is a practitioner of the highest ideal. So people belong to different levels of evolution in practicing these higher ideals. So we should be very, very realistic in judging persons, in understanding persons. So a person who blindly believes in everyone, who is a bit naive, who is thoughtless, who is acting foolishly, that is the real sign of a foolish man. Remember, if you have any question on this subject, I can refer. Take any great, well-known spiritual teacher, Buddha, Christ, Vivekananda, Shankaracharya, Sri Ramakrishna, anyone, Saint Francis of Assisi, anyone you take. All these great men, take Christ, take Buddha, take anyone for that matter. You find in their approach a unique blending of the highest idealism and robust realism. This is a very important thing, because without this balancing act of understanding things correctly, without this aspect of realism or being realistic about what you are experiencing, you will not be able to practice the highest idealism. This is a very important point we should always remember. The highest idealism works only when it is blended with robust realism. That's important. Extreme realism without idealism can degenerate into utilitarianism or some kind of rude pragmatism. We can sometimes become bohemian, kind of bohemian values. So pragmatism or realism should be guided by idealism. But idealism, to be practical in our life, should be blended with realism. So that's why Vidura says, Vishwasati apramatteshu, blindly believing in persons who are basically untrustworthy, is a characteristic of a foolish person. In fact, I can go on giving lectures based on Mahabharata maybe at least for 20-30 years. In fact, we will have too many ideas, you don't require anything other than Mahabharata. Just imagine a book of more than 100,000 verses. There are some versions of Mahabharata much more than 100,000 verses. And it's full of such ideas. And the beauty and the charm of Mahabharata is, remember, it is not, it's basically a religious text. It's a literary classic. And it actually places a mirror in front of you. You can see your own face and you can see for yourself where you stand and where you can see what you need, what teachings, what values you can practice in your own life when you're living in this world of everyday realities. So that's the uniqueness of this text. I hope to give more ideas from Mahabharata in the coming years. Thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. We didn't anticipate any interaction or question answers, but I'm open maybe for some time. If you have, of course, we didn't plan for this. Is there somebody who wants to ask some questions? Most welcome. Yeah.
Pranam,
thank you.
Swami
Thank you.
There is a question from YouTube.
Yeah.
But before I ask the question,
yeah,
I just want to ask about the Vidurniti advice to not misuse your resources.
Yeah.
One of the compelling, there were so many, but one of the compelling precepts is to not misuse your wealth or your skills or your language strength, or to be harsh in punishment or reward.
Yeah.
And I think that is so rich and so consistent with the rest.
Yeah, thank you, Bobby. It's very helpful observation and very, very far-reaching observation. Thank you.
The question from YouTube is from Mark, and it's a very directly put question.
Yeah.
Who is it that crosses over Maya?
Oh yeah, that's a subject related to Advaita philosophy. A person who can live in this world, sees all this, but at the same time keep his mind focused on something transcendental, that person is crossing the Maya. See, physically you cannot cross this world, you are part of this world, which is really Maya, So even while living in this world, playing our role in whatever position we are expected to play our role, at the same time being aware that all these things belong to time, space and causation, these things are non-eternal. Based on that conviction, when we can keep our mind and eyes focused on something higher, that person has gone beyond Maya. That's a person. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
That again corresponds to a robust blending of the highest idealism and an equally robust realism. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
think Saugata has a question.
Yes, Saugata.
So, Maharaj, this dharma, what is, is it different for different people, or is it same for all the people?
Yeah, of course, dharma has two dimensions. These values that we taught, as part, they are common for everyone. But then its application can vary according to our position in life, according to whether you are a student, you are a vanaprastha, you are a sannyasi, or you are a, and also depends upon your state, your job, your role in society, your role in your company, and in all these aspects, But the fundamental principle, what sustains, what supports, what preserves, what keeps things in a state of equilibrium without disturbance, that is dharma. Actually, if we can keep this, the etymological meaning of the word dharma, we get the full picture of what dharma really implies. What supports, what sustains, what preserves. That's a real meaning of the Sanskrit root from which the word dharma originates, dhrudhatu. That's the idea.
So can it be conflicting between two different people?
Yeah, it can be.
One person's dharma can conflict with another person's dharma.
Yeah, really speaking, apparently, you see, for example, the role of a student and teacher, the role of a politician, the role of a saint, the role of a monk and the role of an householder, all these can be different. But at the same time, once you keep in mind this central meaning of what preserves, then you will be able to apply your own version of dharma with full justice, because it doesn't disturb, rather supports, it sustains. So that in that respect, dharma is some kind of harmonizer. It harmonizes our roles, different roles in life. That's what Vidura tells Dhritarashtra. To be very frank, going beyond that, these advices did not have the expected impact on Dhritarashtra. Except, of course, till it was too late. After Mahabharata war, Dhritarashtra and all the elders together, they understood the meaning of what Vidura had taught, and then they departed from their kingdom. They went towards Himalayas, Himalayan retreats, and there they spent the rest of their lifetime. So remember, it is true that Dhritarashtra did not have the wisdom to implement what he learned from Vidura at that time when he heard it. But it is also true that later he realized the real value of what Vidura taught, and it will be too late. After the war was over, Dhritarashtra, all of them, they left their kingdom, they left in search of this higher value. So that's why Mahabharata, there are many places where there is a lot of pathos, a lot of agonies, but also there is profound wisdom. Mahabharata teaches certain values which are relevant for future times, not for the age of Mahabharata itself. It was a time of monarchies and kings and wars between different kings, that was the age. But even today, for example, many of these values, we can write one verse from Mahabharata, put in your pocket and go to your office. You find, actually it really works. You'll find when you're negotiating or maybe arguing with your boss or colleagues, you take it out. Oh yeah, that's true. You'll find it. So that's the practicality of many of the teachings from Mahabharata. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yeah.
I have a question about the numbering, count of the huge number of verses in the epic.
Yeah.
You often mention the huge size of it, and the slokas are couplets, so they're counted as one, but actually they could be counted as two. That would make the epic over 200,000 verses.
Really, that's true. And there are some verses which actually run into 6 lines. So normally slokas have got 4 padas, 4 lines, but different meters are used in different parts of the Mahabharata. The whole text as such can be much bigger than our normal calculations. It's a huge classic. And wherever you go, you find something interesting, something very practical. And that I often, when I read books written by atheists, I wonder, they're all quarreling about God, Creator, hell, heaven, and all that. They don't know this. There are great things in verse like Mahabharata which they cannot disagree with. Here Vidura is not asking you to believe in a God or go to temple or anything like that. He's talking about some common sense wisdom that you can employ anywhere and be a spiritual person, be a wise man. This is the beauty and the uniqueness of Mahabharata. So thank you very much. Thank you.
I think you'll be pleased to know that there's a YouTube viewer who is asking where to get a library copy, to get a bookstore copy, of the Villainy.
Yeah.
Asking if it's in our bookstore.
I think we have. I have not come across that book in our own bookstore because I didn't go for it. I have the original Mahabharata with me. But you have, I think, Villainy has been translated into English, and you can easily get a copy from our own bookstore. Please see our website, sfvedanta.org, and in the website you can find how to get a copy online. I hope there is a copy available, but I'm not sure. But there is no doubt that Villainy has been translated in English. If you go to Google, you can easily get more than one translation. That's what I'm thinking.
Just to be helpful, it's also part of, as you said, it's part of the Udyoga Parva.
Yeah.
So
Udyoga Parva.
Parva.
It's a huge section, but Villainy is only 500 verses, and some of the translated verses may not have the whole text. They may have taken one chapter of Villainy, may have translated. So you can easily get different versions from translations. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Thank you so much. You were very helpful. Your presence was very helpful.